Every major company had some story or some crucible moment where they were near death, weeks away from cash out. We had to pull back, you have to unwind, basically 6 months to a year of work to get back to a point where your infrastructure and people are at the same scale as the business. We survived because we acted quickly and we pivoted. We right-sized for business. We've got nodes in Vancouver, in Toronto, and Halifax. Today it's about 600 people. We sell almost 5,000 cars a month right now. The average car dealership in Canada will sell 150 cars a year. And so we do that in a day right now.
Hey folks, Kim Fettel. I'm the other venture partner at True North Fund. Dante always gets introduced as the good-looking one. I just get introduced as the old one. Anyway, I did actually grow up in Oakville, but I've been in the Valley for a million years. Ran 3 companies in the Valley. I've been there since '97. Always worked for Valley companies. The last one I ran, we ended up selling to Uber in early 2015, and I stayed for 5 crazy years. There running business development for US and Canada, which is where I got to meet Dan. That's the lead into Dan, because Dan joined Uber in 2016.
That's right.
Right. And Dan, claim to fame is he launched Uber Eats here in Canada. So we got to hang out a little bit there. So the fun did for me here is I've known Dan as a coworker, and then he became an LP in our fund, and then we became an investor in his company. So it's a lot of small world shit going on here, which is cool. A little bit about Dan, Gorbit Yeleniv, McGill, then Wharton for an MBA, successful banking career, Toronto, then Wall Street, and then decides to give up a successful Wall Street career for Uber. And then later decides to give that up and go start Clutch, which is now, I looked at the Globe at top of the list, growing 266% in the last 3 years. So, pretty cool. That's cool. Anyway, so as to some questions, so I want to maybe have you share with the group. So like the why question. So why give up this successful banking career to first of all to join Uber? Let's start with Uber and then we'll get a Clutch.
Maybe it wasn't as successful as it needed to be in order for me to switch. So I don't know, maybe it was more about for me, always wanting to build something. I always thought, and I grew up in a small town, so I knew nothing about, really anything. And so finance seemed interesting. Honestly, a friend of mine said, you might like investment banking. And I said, okay, what is that? I think I really truly only figured that out, probably 3 months into the job. But it was a great foundation just to learn about corporate finance and how business worked. But as I spend more time with companies, just felt like this urge to actually be pulling levers myself as opposed to advising from the outside. And so, in my naivete, I decided to go into venture capital because I thought that just would be closer to actually being able to pull the levers. The reality is you're still pretty far away. And that's when the Uber opportunity came up. Uber was launched here in Toronto globally, which was kind of a very cool Canadian thing. It was an experiment that Travis, who's the founder, was like, hey, like if we can get a car to someone in 5 minutes, what could we deliver to someone in that time? And so we ran a bunch of experiments, launched I think the first order was Village Juicery in Toronto, globally on the platform. And from there, it was one of the fastest growing products, I think, ever. Uber Rides was, I think, one of the fastest. And then because we had the advantage of, I think, millions and millions of emails, we were able to launch Uber Eats. And that in Canada, it grew from, I think, 0 to 3 billion of GMV within a year and a half. So by the time I left, we were doing a million deliveries a week, which was kind of crazy, despite given that journey. So that was kind of the impetus, because I always really liked the feedback loop, and venture was great, but the feedback loop is long. And now instead of 6 to 7 years, the feedback loop is days, it's not weeks.
Yeah, and like I said, those are crazy days. You got to start at Uber Eats, which is really one of the first Eats in Uber overall, really, because
this was the first
market. We started it here. Yeah. And those are the times. So you were doing that. Robbie Zam was running the Rise at the time. He was now running Float, so it was kind of a small one back then. But anyway, after that successful run, then it's like I didn't. We spent like years telling people to give up cars and take an Uber, and then you decided to go sell cars. So, like, what's with the clutch thing?
Yeah.
So I started that, and
Well, I think, I mean, this is maybe a commentary on the Canadian landscape, just around interesting jobs. A lot of my colleagues from the US have like really interesting jobs at these like really major companies in the US. The reality in Canada, I mean, I remember when I was a banker and I wanted to move back to Canada, I was living in New York and I was like, well, what is there to do in Canada? I'm like, well, you could go work in corporate development at Rogers or Loblaws. I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't seem as interesting as some of the other stuff that my peers and colleagues are doing in the US. And like the reality is that, for a lot of these global tech companies that have offices in Canada, there's a pretty distinct ceiling. And so I'd reach director level, like the next step, I was running Canada. The next step for me was to move to somewhere. And even, Mac, who I guess is an LP now, who's what's his official title? President? He's now president?
COO.
COO? Right. So he's still COO of Uber, homegrown here in Toronto, and for a long time got away with being able to stay in Toronto and still do that job running Asia and running a whole bunch of different markets. But now he's been forced to move to the US because that's like at some point that's a reality. I just moved from the US. And so for me to move back to the US to go and take on this, different role was not ideal. And I probably had another year or two at Uber. There was still a few things I wanted to do, but then got a call from a board member that I knew back in the VC days and said, hey, there's this car company. The founder just launched in Halifax because the regulatory landscape, for those that don't know, is actually really hard to start a car business in Ontario. It's very easy to start one in Halifax. And so we flew to Halifax, and he was trying to launch Ontario. He started the business when he was 24, and so it was very young. It's a very capital intensive business. We've raised over 200 million of VC capital, over 150 million of debt. It's very capital intensive, and as a 24-year-old, it was really tough to attract talent. And so got to get to know him, and he was like, hey, seemed like a good guy. You're selling cars, online, or sorry, you're selling food online and delivering through a bunch of other cars online. And I got really excited about the fact that in Canada, there was no retail brand for used cars. At the time, the only way to buy a car or sell a car was to either you go to a dealership and you spend 5 to 6 hours on a Saturday, you haul your kids there, they're running around, they're screaming, you're thinking of F&I managers trying to like convince you to buy some warranty while your kids are like, I'm bored, I'm going to leave. Like that is a dealership experience. Or you meet, you list your car on Kijiji and you meet some stranger in a parking lot and you like do some like back out with deal with them. Like those were literally the only two ways to buy or sell vehicles in this country. Meanwhile, CarMax has existed in the US since 1993. There's a whole bunch of large dealer groups that have like a pretty good brand experience. Carvana had launched. And so in Canada, we were probably, a lot of things in Canada are probably 10 years behind in terms of like the technology adoption curve. In cars, we were probably 20 to 25. And so to me, that seemed crazy. It seemed crazy that you couldn't have the same consistent experience across the country in what's the second largest consumer spending item that people have. And so that was the VC lens being like, this is an entirely white space opportunity that no one's captured.
And it hasn't always been easy. So you've had kind of a unique roller coaster. I mean, people talk about the ups and downs of startups. Yeah, we all know like 7 out of 10 startups go to business and all this kind of stuff. But just talk a little bit about your roller coaster ride, the up, then the down, and then up. Okay, if it doesn't hurt too much.
No, at this point, I feel like it's kind of behind us. But I think every company goes through some degree. Every major company has some story or some crucible moment that they have to tell because of they were near death and they were weeks away from cash out. Like we certainly had that. I think we weren't unique in that. I mean, I think we're unique that we kind of came out on the other end. But 2022 for all the investors in the room, like investors in summer of 2022, basically every investor just went on holidays. Like there was, I'd call folks in the US and they'd be like, we're in Aspen and we're not chatting until at least after Labor Day. We tried to raise a round back then. But it was the 2020, we raised a massive $100 million Series B in late 2021. And the investor came in, wrote us a check and said, go spend this as fast as we can, or as you can. There's another 100 million behind it. Don't worry about it. Just let's grow. And so it was an entirely growth minded environment. And then, you guys all know this, like then pretty quickly in 2022, that music stopped. The cracks started forming. And you're building, when you grow, you're scaling it. We went from 20 million in revenue in 2020 to 85 the year after to 200. And so like when you're scaling that quickly, you have to build infrastructure, you have to hire people ahead of that growth. And then you turn off the taps and say, actually, no, you can't grow that quickly anymore. You have to unwind, basically, 6 months to a year of work to get back to a point where your infrastructure and your people are at the same scale as the business. And so that's what we had to do. We had to pull back a lot of the growth that we had built, the infrastructure and the people infrastructure that we built ahead of the growth. And then the growth never came because, taps were turned off. And so that was the harsh reality of, I think, a lot of companies back then. I think we survived because we acted quickly and we pivoted and we kind of right-sized the business, pretty quickly. And so that was the journey. And for us, that was like a very important foundational exercise to build the unit economics, to build the foundation of the business so that, now we can continue to scale with, really healthy margins and healthy economics that are, sustainable for eternity.
Well, that's a good segue into kind of the theme of this session and kind of scaling to $1 billion and getting to that and just kind of the lessons learned along the way. And then just a little bit back to the Uber experience, because I think it is relevant here. We both went through that fast, accelerated time. And when I joined, it was 3,000 employees. There were 27,000 when I left 5 years later. I think you joined a year later. We left roughly around the same time. We saw that kind of hyper scale. There's some similarities, obviously, with Clutch and Uber, both two-sided marketplaces. And also, Uber wasn't really a tech company to say. It was an operational machine. I mean, what it was really known for is just the ability to scale and do it incredibly well and very fast. What did you take from that? And also maybe around cultures, and we just throw away. I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. The operational rigor and excellence that we were forced into because of scale was really helpful for this business. And, at 1 million deliveries a week, there's something that goes, there's a 1 in a million event that happens every single week. You got a food delivery, which is effectively 2 human interactions per delivery, right? Driver to customer, then driver to restaurant. And so you've got 2 million human interactions happening every single week. There will be conflict. And so it was just a lot of conflict we had to resolve and just stuff breaking all over the place. And so I think that allowed me to normalize chaos. And I think that experience at Uber has helped in that regard because, now we're delivering cars at scale across the country, and we had literally cars like light on fire. And so I was on vacation, and someone called me on a FaceTime, like, the car's on fire, and I'm like, well, okay, stay safe. Let's call the police. Let's call the fire department. Let's actually go to the steps. We have protocol for that. And I called the customer. I'm like, I'm sorry, we can't deliver that car to you because it was on fire. And they said, we don't believe you. It's like, I think the customer said, I'd never heard that happen. And I was like, I'd never had that happen before either. And then he actually drove by the car, but anyway, kind of a tangent, but the point being is that, you get to this level of scale and stuff breaks. And we got really good at, understanding when it broke, fixing it, and then getting to that next plateau. And I talked a lot about building on an S curve. No one should be building linearly. I think it's really hard to build a company linearly. And it's also really hard to toggle between profitability to do profitability and growth at the same time. And so, even if it's, on month-long sprints or 2-month sprints, and we did a lot of those at Uber, is to get the entire team aligned to that singular goal, whether it's growth or profitability, or unit economics or customer experience or a metric like call response time, whatever that is, make that sprint, fix that thing, and then move on to the next one. Because I think just being able to focus an organization on singular goals is really helpful to execute along to across those goals.
Cool. Just maybe two quick topics before we wrap up. I want to end up on kind of fundraising and that journey for you in a moment, but just maybe before we get to that, just give people a little bit of a look inside Clutch right now. Say, where's growth look like now? What's happening for Clutch that you can share here? How big are things now, and how are you seeing them?
Yes, so we are. So for those who don't know the business, what we do is we actually buy cars directly from consumers. The tech is in the fact that we built and invested a ton into our ability to generate prices for a vehicle in real time to millions of people on a quarterly basis. I think we generate something like 250,000 offers per month right now, and so the people coming in trying to find out what the car is valued, and we provide an instant cash offer for that vehicle. So that's liquidity for that car. We then buy that vehicle. Half of the cars then meet a retail standard, and we put them through a vertically integrated reconditioning process that's built on the manufacturing principles so that we can process the car, we can recondition that car, fix the car. And on the back end of that, you've got a really high quality vehicle. The other half go to a wholesale channel, which we sell to dealers and auctions. And then we have a whole e-commerce experience where you can buy the vehicle directly online. And then we built logistics, full logistics network, because at least as of today, you can't slap a FedEx label on the car and expect it to get to the place where you want it to get to. So we've had to build our own last mile delivery, and we deliver that vehicle to the consumer. And we have retail throughout the country where you can pick that car up. So that's the model. It's incredibly capital intensive. We have acres, like we have large swaths of land. Our largest facility sits on 20 acres. We're looking at one that's almost 45 acres right now, to be able to host all these cars. And then we've got this logistic network that's going to connect the entire country. Today, we've got nodes in Vancouver, in Toronto, and Halifax. Today, it's about 600 people. And we sell almost 5,000 cars a month right now. The average car dealership in Canada will sell 150 cars a year. And so we do that in a day right now. So it's car selling at a different scale, and no one comes from a dealership. And the challenge for the business is the physical nature of it. Our biggest barrier to growth is actually physical real estate.
Yeah, so that's leverage the inventory and real estate. You talked about this before. Is talk a little bit about the fundraising challenges it have over kind of two parts to this one. First of all, just your journey on fundraising, the frustrations and the challenge with that, then we'll end up in terms of a happy ending with later on with Genera Fund. But talk a little bit about that journey you went through, and it's hardware, is this inventory, and a lot of BC don't like because they like nice, easy SaaS models and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I would say that it wasn't as challenging as it may have seemed from the other side. And there was a certain set of investors that really believed in our model. The fact that we have physical infrastructure, that it is capital intensive, is a massive barrier to entry. It is one of our advantages, one of the reasons why it's really hard to do this business. We do have competition. It is traditional dealerships, but there's no other player in Canada that does our business model because it is very hard. That said, all that capital has come from the U.S. And I think it's frustrating as a Canadian to have to try to convince a Canadian that the market is big enough and that there's enough cars for us to sell in this country. Whereas I go to the U.S. and they run the numbers, and I'm like, yeah, that market's big enough. Here's the check, right? It's almost this self-hating or self-deprecating thing where Canadians look at the market and be like, oh, you're not going to the U.S., you're not going global. That's not a big enough opportunity. If you've ever driven down the 401 and look at all the cars, there's a lot of cars. And we have less than 1% market share. And so it is a big market, but it's been frustrating that Canadians actually don't see the opportunity. This is a generalization, but a lot of Canadians haven't really seen the opportunity. One, because no one's tried to build this. And secondly, investors have been largely unsupportive in this country. And so we've had to turn 96% of our capital has come from the U.S. And I mean, Americans see the opportunity, frankly, more than Canadians have.
Yeah, you're still being nice about it. You told me services people would fly up from the U.S. to talk to you, and you couldn't get people to drive
Yeah, I mean that's enough. I mean, this is the mentality. I mean, as a VC, a former VC, I mean, VC is not an inbound sales funnel. It should be an outbound sales funnel, and I think a lot of GPs rely on the inbound sales funnel too much, or almost exclusively. Whereas, in having now been on the other side, the number of VCs in the U.S. that call me and ask to visit, I probably have at least a weekly. Someone's like, "Oh, I'm interested. I've seen some news. Like, I'm interested in your category. Like, let me learn more." And I would say like 75% of them don't go anywhere. But it's relationship building. It's at least like understanding what we do to see if it fits in the investment criteria. At least for our primary rounds, not a single Canadian investor has ever reached out or visited. I've gotten term sheets from Canadians on an outbound effort from folks that have written term sheets but never visited. And we have a physical business. Like it's a real, like if you ever want to invest, you have to come see the facility before you invest. I think it's like just good diligence, frankly. But it's shocking how, I almost want to shake folks and be like, just do your job, right? Just like as an investor, as a GP, just go out, look for companies that you're interested in, go meet them. You don't have to be interested in mine, but you should at least be like going out, right? And that's my frustration. And I think it's yeah, and maybe it's incentive structure, maybe it's complacency, I don't know, but it's a stark contrast where you get people calling me from San Francisco and being like, I will come and visit, and they fly up from San Francisco, but like I know there's traffic, but the 30 and a 5-minute drive to Mississauga is like too much, and it's frustrating.
I had to ask Dan that question because I knew he did get that out. It's been a source of frustration. But we're getting the hook in a minute, but I wanted to finish up and just. The good news is that, for us and for the fund, it ended up well. And you heard the panel earlier talking about secondaries, and we're very fortunate as well as the JS and Real. You got an introduction to this opportunity. You approved that one. And so now this is the shameless plug for Cunard Fund. But why? And I thought,
well, I think, you were one of the few that actually, were commercial and was like, hey, like, let's go try to go get into this It's a great, I mean, one of the reasons why I like being an LP is because, like, at least this example, you took the initiative, made the contact, bought shares probably like 10 months after the valuation was set. And so we'd already doubled the business. And so you bought shares for a business that was twice the size at the same price from like 12 months ago. And so like, that's like, in theory, that's an automatic return, right? So I think that model worked really well. If you're going to make the effort, and I know you guys for a while, I'm not going to say no, because it's a great deal, and it helps the ecosystem. And Trimonis has been helpful in connecting me to folks that I certainly would have not been introduced to. It's a small world, but just recently Chris introduced me to a pretty rock star chief people officer that is Canadian. I don't know, maybe she ends up back in this country, but I'd love to continue to have that dialogue with her, and who knows where that goes. But I think those are things that are important, and that connectivity is super valuable to us.
Well, thanks for that. We've got, maybe I can go a little bit over. Any questions for Dave here?
It's a car question. I was wondering, so you have car charts, you have cars. Why somebody brought those two models together? So if I go and buy a car for you, why so shares?
So, and in Ontario, you can't target a lot of social shares. That's the law.
And if it wasn't a law, is that a...
If it wasn't a law, so they are actually, FSRA's experimenting around that right now to get car dealerships down to all shirts. We sell, so the way the car dealers should make money is primarily through financing, warranty, Insurance, and not car insurance to other insurance products. If you ever go into a car dealership and try to pay cash, they will likely, not like we try to disincentivize cash. We will let you buy cash. Some car dealerships will not let you buy cash, and most the underneath the hood, we are more of a fintech business than we are of a car retailer, and so we make most of our money originating loans. We've started to write loans on our own balance sheet at this point, and then insurance and then warranty. Car insurance specifically, there are laws around that right now.
Okay. Well, I think at this point we're going to wrap up that. Let me just thank Dan for his time here today. Okay.
Awesome. Okay.